Hello and welcome to a new interview from MinnMax. MinnMax is a place about games, friends getting better. My name is Ben Hansen. Thank you for being here. I am very excited about today's interview. Today's interview is with a video production team that I've always wanted to talk to and I never have. It is with Area 5. If you've been following video games coverage for a while, you might remember the 1UP show back at 1UP. In my mind, it's the high watermark for video games coverage at an outlet. It was incredibly influential on me, and this video production team is a huge part of the reason why. So in this interview, we talk about the unbelievable challenges of turning around the 1UP show on a weekly schedule every single week back in the era of 2005 to 2009. The implosion of 1UP when that entire site went down, when they struck out on their own with Area 5 and made Co-op, which was the spiritual successor to the 1UP show. And then we talk about the pivot to doing freelance video production work around the video game industry. They've worked on documentaries with Blizzard, with Capcom for I Am Street Fighter, celebrating that game's anniversary a while back. And perhaps the biggest is the making of The Last of Us, called Grounded, that documentary that came out with Last of Us Part 1. It's weird to call it that now. And then they just released Grounded 2, all about the making of The Last of Us Part 2. So in this discussion, we talk about what it was like behind the scenes of putting that documentary together about the making of The Last of Us Part 2, working with Naughty Dog, their thoughts on Naughty Dog wanting to tackle crunch and discussing crunch and how the plan is for Naughty Dog to leave that behind them, and all of that messaging. We talk about all this stuff within this interview, so I hope you enjoy it. If you do enjoy it, you can help support us by subscribing to MinnMax's YouTube channel. It's one little click for you, and it's a huge thing for an independent games outlet like us. And if you really want to help support content directly like this, you can go to patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. If you jump in at that $5 tier, you can unlock the podcast version of all of our interviews, our game club discussions. We're doing one for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth at the moment. It's the best, most thorough discussion about that game on the internet. And if you really want to dive back in time, the entire origin of the game club format that we're doing with the Deepest Dive, its roots are with 1UP, back when they used to do this on their podcast. Also, if you're a hardcore Area 5 fan and you want to know the full journey of their documentary series called Outerlands, I have made a separate clip that's that full journey. And so you can look at the description on this YouTube video to find that full excerpt where you can learn all about what's happening with Outerlands and what has been some of the struggles along the way for that project. As always, there's time codes below for your convenience while watching this interview, so you can jump to the segment you're most interested in. But hey, thank you for supporting independent games media. Subscribe to our channel if you enjoy it. And without further ado, here's Area 5. Ryan, Cesar, Jason, Matt, welcome to MinnMax, guys.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
Honor to have you.
Good to be here.
Oh my gosh. I have wanted to talk to y'all for a very long time. This is like, this is a very geeky experience for me. So thanks everybody for jumping in and tolerating a slight stroll down memory lane. If you're all okay with this idea.
Yeah, 100%. Sure thing.
Okay. Great. I feel like it's bizarre that I have never talked to you all. Like, you are a huge inspiration for me getting into the games industry. And I was at Game Informer as their first video producer for 9 years and all that stuff. And I feel like I annoyed everybody there just by beating the drum and be like, why don't we just do it like 1UP did it? Because they were the best. Let's just model everything after 1UP in every which way. And turns out that's harder to do than people would think, but we can unpack all those reasons. But I'm just curious. There's a lot to cover with y'all, but the 1UP show, how often does it come up in your lives these days? I can't be alone, right, for still wanting to scream about this show so many years later.
I don't know. Matt, I feel like it would come up from Matt's the most in the industry still being on the Rebel FM podcast and all that. So I don't know. How often does it come up for you, man?
I would say every time I go to an industry event, there's at least one person that brings it up.
Okay.
So it's not like a constant thing, occasionally, on my podcast that Ryan mentioned, it was started by Anthony Gallegos and Arthur Geese. And if you've been in the industry or in games media for a while, you know those two names. And I was a special guest frequently until the point where they're just like, okay, you're just on the podcast now.
Yeah.
And but they so we'll get letters into that show, and every now and then somebody will bring it up. It's like, are you ever going to bring it back? And, we can get into it, multiple reasons why no. But yeah, but I think that's about it. It's not like, as the year goes on, it gets more and more memory hold, right? And like not as many people remember it. And you really have to have been there at the time, or like you were, Ben, and like be like at a competing website and be aware of it for something that's really top of mind anymore?
Yeah. I mean, Ryan, do you think about it a lot, or is it just, it's something I did when I was really young, no big deal, moving on?
Honestly, more the latter, but like, I do find that unlike a lot of creative folks or artists or whatever who can't look at their old work, I don't find that I have that. Like, I usually can have a drink or two to try to put myself in a different headspace, and then put on something that we've done, and like it's still enjoyable to me. I'm like, oh yeah, that was cool. Like, this is actually pretty rad. Way to go. And so, you know, I very infrequently look at the One Up Show, but when it comes up, or when I check something out, or someone mentions something, or posts a little clip or something like that, I'm always like, yeah, that's pretty good for the time. What we were trying to do, I think we pulled off something really unique and really fun. And you know, like, I can understand why it's not the most popular thing ever, and people don't go back to it all the time, because so much of it is kind of like news coverage. It's like really of the moment. So unless you really wanted to see what the critical reception was to the original Gears of War at the moment that it came out, there's not much reason to go back, unless you go back to the beginning and really enjoy the sort of like narrative performances of our coworkers and our staff at the Ziff Davis offices in San Francisco. To me, that's the most fun part of the show, is the narrative elements, the little skits and the comedy bits, because everyone was just like playing heightened versions of themselves. That's what was so sweet about it, is like our work life was kind of really like that. We just amped it up slightly to put it on the show. And you know, you worked at Game Informer. My guess is it was largely pretty similar, like just a kind of good vibe place to work with, like a bunch of fun people that were into the same stuff. And, you know, that's the part of it. The part of it I miss isn't making the show. It's the like, it was just a great place to work with an intensely amazing group of people like that. You know, like, I don't see them very frequently anymore, but when we do see each other, it's like, I'm not going to say the F word because I don't think that work should be equated with that feeling. But I will say they're very close friends. And when I see them, it's like we haven't ever been apart. You know? It's
like we grew up in the same house together. Yeah, I get it. I mean, you say, I mean, I have a lot of fond memories of Game Informer and whatnot. But I mean, if I tried to recruit my coworkers at the time and be like, all right, we're going to all do a skit about buying this game, everyone would tell me like, hey, F off, man, I have so much other work to do. The idea of like, you want me to act on top of doing my day job, like that's the part that blows my mind about the One Up Show. Or even just, I just went back to prep for this interview, and I spent my Saturday night with a beer, just watching a ton of old episodes, and it was an absolute blast. And everyone felt surprisingly comfortable on camera. And I guess that's hats off to you all, because you just get a bunch of gamers together. It's not going to, of course, obviously be a great conversation. And I don't know if that's editing or coaching, directing ahead of time, or just the camaraderie in that office. Like, what do you account for just kind of the ease of everybody on camera back for the One Up Show?
I would say if I'm going to credit anything, I would say John Davison, the guy who was the editorial director of the whole group at the time, gave us like the freedom to do it in the first place. And because we were from the highest level, given the freedom to make this crazy thing, everyone else was encouraged and to do it, and felt like, you know, it was a worthwhile effort. And I think they all kind of liked it. I don't want to speak for everyone. I'm sure there were some people that didn't want to be on camera, and they would just tell us. But generally speaking, people would be willing to try, and we made it our goal to try to make them look as good as possible. Like, one of my internal goals was to never embarrass anyone, you know, like I just wanted it to present everyone's best version of themselves, you know, generally speaking.
To add to that, in addition to there being like, you know, people that would be good on and people that wouldn't be, you know, there was kind of a chicken and egg scenario with who would be, whether it was One Up drew good people or good people sought out One Up. Either way, there was kind of this like amalgamation of personalities that were actually like really good at talking with each other. I mean, there were groups in other scenarios, you know, the Giant Bombs and the other ones, but like One Up One Up kind of tended to draw in a certain type of people to an extent, and these kind of people did well on podcasts and did well on shows. So, like I said, whether it was a chicken and egg thing, we wound up with this group of people that were like just really good personalities to watch. So,
yeah, too, like just cool folks.
Yeah. I think too there was like some of those conversations were already sort of like in the office, whether it's like video games, TV shows, whatever. It's like you kind of like saw it around the office too. And sometimes bring those things into the store, like the narrative and that sort of thing.
One great example of that would be like, say a new fighting game was coming out, like Soul Calibur 3 was big around our office, or one of our guys in a tournament won a Virtua Fighter 4 cabinet, and we weren't allowed to take prizes individually. So that thing just kind of like lived in the office as a thing in the office. And so, as like after work little rivalries and tournaments would pop up, we kind of wrote those into the show, which then gave more life to the actual real life experience because it encouraged people to play those things more. And then that just sort of cycled and would feed back into the thing. And so like a lot of we did some narratives that were really silly. I remember we did like a zombie episode, but like a lot of the stuff was just kind of taking what was happening in the office and trying to figure out a way to dramatize it a little bit and give it a little bit of a funny edge.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about that group and just being a good group overall. I mean, kind of the proof's in the pudding for just kind of the supernova of talent after One Up imploded, right? I mean, there's too many names, so sorry for leaving folks out. But I mean, Brian Intihar was on so many One Up show episodes and the podcast and stuff, and now he's the creative director for Spider-Man series over there at Insomniac, and Luke Smith with Destiny, Mark McDonald with Enhanced Games now, and Shane Bettenhausen over there at Sony, and David Ellis over there at 343 and Crystal Dynamics. Yeah, Tina Sanchez at Respawn 343. I mean, or Call of Duty. It goes on forever. And that's just good hiring. Or One Up was such a hotbed of talent that when you left that place, you were ready and you had a good handle on the industry.
Those are it's hard for me to think of people there that weren't incredibly talented. Like we just somehow lucked out and got the best group of people. Again, I would credit John Davison, Sam, and eventually when they rose to positions of power, Mark, Simon Cox. They just got Dan Shu, Jeff Green, like the people that were running each of the various outlets at Ziff Davis in San Francisco, basically found people they wanted to work with, and it turned into an amazing group of people. Again, that's what I miss. Like I work from home now. I miss going into an office and being surrounded by like 50, 100 amazingly talented, smart, funny, cool people that wanted to be at the office doing the work they were doing. Like, that's part of the reason the One Up show is the way that it is because that was the reality on the ground on that floor.
Yeah, everyone wanted to be there for sure.
Yeah, it's a weird thing, but let me just keep kissing your asses on this one. It's like it's such a smart idea to have the podcast and then the One Up show, and I feel like they just work together to create this is a gross phrase, but a sticky outlet. Like getting to see the faces and be like, oh, it's that person on the podcast. Now I understand how their tastes are evolving after they played another 20 hours of this game. Like it just let you grab on, and to have so many shots around the office in San Francisco even, like it gave games coverage such a sense of place, which I'd never really had before. And that is just incredibly important for like attaching you to these personalities. So incredibly smart, the way that it was all pieced together. But I'd imagine a lot of it just comes from, a passion for wanting to do a show like this. And then, hey, it turns out it's a byproduct is we're attaching people to these personalities in a big way, and probably somewhere on a bottom line somewhere that's helpful.
Let me just say, we can't take credit for any of the podcast stuff. That was all Jane Pinkard's original idea. She started the podcasts. Those eventually got sort of like taken over and spun off into what became One Up Yours. And then, of course, the podcast like splintered out across the things like that. But somehow we were not involved with the podcast, just the video show.
Yeah. How tough was it to put together that show every week?
There was that was one reason why I came on. I came on pretty late into the process. The show was already established, but I was hired as a producer because the show needed a producer, but it honestly, I didn't help that much. There was still an all-nighter every Thursday night, basically, to get the show out. This was before Uber and before Lyft, so we were downtown San Francisco, leaving the office at 3-4 in the morning. Like while the shows were finally getting rendered or uploaded, and it would be hard to find a taxi, and we'd had to get a taxi to go home. Every single week was an all-nighter to get the show out.
I would say all-nighter. I would say one all-nighter minimum, because there were many, many, many weeks where I'd have an extra big section, or Jason would have an extra big section, or someone would be tossed a double piece, and there would be 2 all-nighters, 3 all-nighters. I mean, I remember there was this to play into that story. There was one night where I was there. This was before the Thursday. I was there all night editing some segment, and we used to get Red Bulls sent to us, like cases and cases and cases of Red Bulls. So we just wind up with stacking them up and I lined up, I think it was 9 Red Bulls that night.
I think it's 7.
I think it was at the 9th.
My nose bleed.
I was gonna say, I think at the 9th my nose started to bleed, just like wouldn't stop bleeding.
Whoa!
And this is like at 8 a.m. after I finish this section. I'm showing the guys, and I'm all proud of it. And I take a sip of this Red Bull, and my nose just pops. And I just remember thinking, I was like, man, I should never do this again. This is 9 is too many Red Bulls for one night.
I can tell you what my schedule was that let's say it starts on the weekend. So Friday night, I'm finally done with the show, and so it's time to play games. So each of us would cover at least one thing on the show, usually, plus the people spread throughout the office. But what that meant was that every weekend we were playing through a game to be ready, taking notes, to be ready to talk about it. Then we would come in on Monday, and we would sit in a meeting and try to plan out the list of content for that week, what the narrative was going to be, what the segments were going to be. Segments would come together first, so we would pretty much know what we were doing there. But sometimes the narrative wouldn't have an idea by Monday, maybe even Tuesday, maybe Wednesday, and then Wednesday afternoon, it's like, okay, now we can film this thing. But all the while playing the games, all the while basically trying to capture as much footage as we can. But again, I feel like because of the sort of ramp up and things releasing on Friday, the beginning of the week was the easy part of the week. And sometimes there would be more lollygagging around. And then as the week would draw on, we'd start recording the segments. Once a segment was recorded, then that would get edited down. And based on that edited down segment, just the people talking about it, then we would develop a list of gameplay footage that we needed. So we didn't capture our footage ahead of time. We captured some, but usually the capture happened after the recording so that we could get exactly the footage that we knew we would need to cover each part of the segment, which I think is really now this is more common, but back then no one did that. And so
no one ever captured gameplay footage that like matched what people were talking about. Like you watch X-Play and stuff back in the day, a show that I loved, by the way. The gameplay footage never matched what they were talking about. They would just put up whatever random B-roll they could. And honestly, the One-Up show, and I can say this because I didn't start with the One-Up show, like I came in later, like I said, was the first show to have the brilliant idea of having the gameplay match what people were talking about. And I think that was one of the things that really stuck with gamers and with the gamer audience, and why people love the show so much is because they could actually see the game. They could actually understand what people meant when they were saying this sucks or this is great. And there it was right in front of you. And now it's de rigueur. Nobody would think of doing it any other way, but that was a unique idea.
Now you play the game and record at the exact same time and just like long form, stream the whole thing. So anyway,
we do that back then. Hard drives weren't big enough.
This was back in the days with the Sony mini DV decks.
Right.
We'd have plug them in.
So basically we'd record all this, we'd record the segments, edit the segments down, record the gameplay footage, then start editing the footage into the segments. So that's all happening. We have like 3 or 4 editors all working on their various segments, usually at least picking one segment at a time. And then the narratives start getting recorded, that stuff starts getting edited. So my all-nighters were always Thursday night, and I left the office sometimes, but usually I didn't. I know how the smell of the 8th floor of 101 2nd Street changes at 3 a.m. in the morning. It is very different, and it's got a musky smell that you don't really need to ever experience. So I would stay. Usually the final render was popping, like I'd finish around 3 or 4 a.m. the edit, and then the render would take several hours, and then the upload would take several hours. This was before YouTube, so we were just uploading to like a server, and there would be a download link. And my goal was to usually have it up by like somewhere between 9 a.m. and noon on Friday. And then what was great about the time, for us anyway, was that basically, as soon as it went up, people would start downloading it, and we'd head over to the NeoGAF forums where there was a thread made and then instant feedback. So basically, like, I was in this delirious, half-awake, like coffee-fueled. I stayed away from that Red Bull because Cesar's nose would bleed. Coffee-fueled, like haze, half awake, half asleep, and then get the show up, and then start seeing that feedback coming in, which would usually be something that made us feel pretty good. And then by about 3, I could head home and try to stay awake till 9 p.m. before passing out. And then the process started over and over. Yeah. It just went on that for however long we did, 3 or 4 years.
Yep. And I was the one doing the intros to the show, and if you remember, there was 3 seasons every year.
Yeah,
loosely based around like the big convention seasons and stuff. Like we'd do a big convention, then we'd come back and there'd be a new season started after we had a couple days break. And those were my biggest all-nighters, were at the start of every season, because I had to come up with a new intro and find a new way to do it. And I usually spent like, at least 2 nights in a row, like just up all night, 24-hour days working on super old, crappy versions of After Effects, putting these intros together. So that stuff, that every part of this process was crazy. There was no part of it that had anything even resembling a work-life balance, because people didn't know what that was back then. But at the same time, it was very gratifying to be done with a thing every week that you could be proud of. And then you could just like over the weekend, you'd be like, wow, I accomplished something. And it felt good over that weekend.
I would say it's a good thing to do in your 20s. Don't attempt it at a different time in your life. And also to when people ask us why doesn't exist anymore? Well, largely because like you have to assemble a cast of characters that all want to be able to do it. So it has to be in an office. So the only places that could actually do it are like a place like Game Informer, or something like a game developer could have done it themselves. Where you need a place where there's an office where a bunch of people are all going to be, say, playing the same games all at the same time. Yeah. And then you could do it in that location. That's the alternative is something like co-op, which we did afterwards, where we did it ourselves the exact same way, but then we had to bring in guest people to talk about the games, which is cool too, but it meant that the narrative sequences were generally mostly just us, rather than being able to include this like large cast of characters.
Right.
And we had to play almost all of the games ourselves. So it like doubled our workload that we'd had at 1UP, because there weren't other people to rely on to play all the games.
Like with the 1UP show, it was just the timing was perfect, because you had all the magazines there still, and then like the website that was kind of starting to take off. And so as the magazines sort of started to fade off, you had still that big group of people and all those different personalities. And just, I don't know if there's a place that could be like that anymore at this time. There's like no more magazines.
Yeah. Game Informer. And was it worth it overall when you look back on that time?
I think that was part of it. It was like easy to be there because you wanted to be there. Yeah. And so even if I had to be there for 2 days straight working on something, it's like I wanted to be there. And even when I finished what I was working on, we'd all end up playing games together anyways, whether it was like Guitar Hero or, Soul Calibur or Street Fighter. Like we wanted to we just wanted to be around each other. So it was easy. Yeah.
It was bad for our health. Again, I wouldn't want to have done it my whole life or anything like that. But for a couple of years, I don't know. Like humans do a really great job of remembering the good things and sort of forgetting the bad things.
Yeah.
But you know, I wouldn't traded it for anything else. I had a partner at the time who I wasn't the best partner to because I was just playing games all the time. But you know, like, I don't know. It was a good. My memories of that period are very fond, but I would never want to. I literally physically couldn't do it again.
At the same time, that's you know, people talk about putting in your 10,000 hours or whatever. Like that is my film school. Like I went to film school, but that is my One Up Show was my film school. Like I wouldn't have the skills I had today if I didn't, you know, if I wasn't forced to learn to light with, you know, sunlight and a bounce card or you know, a lamp and a diffusion, you know, like I know lensing, I know lighting, I know how to make a scene come together really fast because we were forced to do that every week for, you know, 3 years in a row. Well, not even counting co-op, 5 years in a row if you count those. So like, I wouldn't have the skills I would. I know these guys wouldn't be the editors they are if it wasn't for us making like a show on the week every week for years.
Yeah.
Doing the segments, the like game reviews was so formalized, the process of doing it, that it got to the point where it was teachable. And so there were many people who didn't go to film school, who were not trained editors, that we simply taught how to do the editing for. So whether that, I believe Matt was not editing before we started.
Interesting.
My former producers, Kathleen Sanders and Jane Pinkard, weren't video editors before, but then they became video editors. And I'm sure there are other, Jay Frechette, who was one of the co-founders of Area 5, like who's gone on to make a bunch of games, work in games. He was an editor too. So, you know, it was just like we learned to be fast, and we learned how to systematize it, I guess.
Yeah. You all went above and beyond for so many years. Just even if people don't bring it up on a regular basis, know that it was appreciated. There was an audience out there that every week was like, Jesus, this rules. You didn't have to do that, but I assume you all know that, right? It's like you could have phoned something in.
We would have done it forever, or I don't know. Forever is a long word.
We would have definitely kept
going.
But
we would have
kept
while,
going.
Yeah. Like we didn't have any plans to stop when it stopped. Like we felt like we were just hitting our stride. I think our last episode had like a really cool Street Fighter 4 segment that we shot with some fun, like Seth Killian, who I think wasn't working at Capcom at the time, and then a bunch of like, he went to a place where there was a bunch of like the best NorCal players like all playing at I think it was John Choi's house or something like that. And I don't know, just like a really fun segment that like, I don't know, it felt. The reason Area 5 exists is because we had a lot of gas left in the tank afterwards, and we just needed a place to put it.
Yeah. And I guess that first episode of Co-op where everybody ran into the house and up the stairs, like heart melting at the time. It was like, oh, after those 1UP layoffs, like that was exactly what you would hope to see. Is like, hey, here's everybody else in an independent space now, and they're all still together and they're all still friendly with each other. It was just like, this is the greatest bandage on the wound of all of our hearts who were fans of 1UP back in the day. So thanks for making that.
I think it was a bandage
possible
for us at the time too.
Oh yeah, of course. Okay, there's one thing I want to go back and talk about a little bit, which is there's a video that blew my mind at the time, and I still think it's amazing. But what was it? RSVP? Do you remember this, Ryan? And everybody else,
exactly,
I suppose.
I knew exactly. Like let's just get it out of the way first. We ripped it off from Jon Favreau's Dinner for Five.
Right.
And we were like, it's such a no-brainer idea. Let's just do it. And we love that episode and have gone on to use that technique going forward in other projects. So, for example, there's an episode of Outerlands that's not out yet, but one of the things we did that is in one of the episodes is we shot with the founders of the Evo tournament series, and we put them all in a restaurant and we let them do the RSVP thing. And so that just becomes, and you see it. I mean, whatever, it wasn't us. If anything, it's Jon Favreau. Like, he's the guy that deserves credit. But like, if you watch the documentary on the making of the latest, or not Ragnarok, but the latest new God of War, or what's that called? Raising Kratos.
Yep.
They bring all their creators together and sit them around a dinner table and like cut to that footage every once in a while, you know?
Yeah.
It's an undeniably rad technique. Just get a bunch of interesting people let them talk to each other in a casual setting. You're going to get good results.
And have some booze on the table will help in a big way.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep.
Yeah. So that video, if people watching or listening are familiar with it, it was Eric Wolpaw, the writer of Portal, Jessica Mack, and Dylan Cuthbert, programmer for Star Fox, and Mark McDonald. And it was just like, it was the first time where I saw game developers in a acting casual, and it just, it blew my mind. I think that was another magical thing for One Up back in the day, is like, it really felt like it was tearing down any boundaries and kind of showing that like, hey, we're friends with these game developers. They're human beings, everybody. It's not just quotes in a video game magazine. And it just, it changed my perspective on everything.
You just reminded me of, the reason this all started is because I went to film school, and at the time I was watching GameSpot had started doing video reviews. It was Greg Kasavin, Jeff Gersman, Ricardo Torres, and they would just like review their games. And I thought they were amazing, but also flawed, mostly in that they weren't matching the gameplay footage to what they were saying. So I was like, that's the first thing to do to fix it. But I was like, what if you could do this in a more casual way? So at the time, I had just finished school. I was living back at home with my mom, but I was crashing on the couch of two of my friends, Matt and our other friend, Carlos, who were working at GameSpy Industries at the time, which was the company that made a bunch of server browsing software to let you connect to like Quake games and stuff like that, but had also developed an editorial staff and were doing, daily news coverage of video games. And I wanted in the door very, very bad. Eventually did work my way in there, but we would spend our nights at their apartment, sitting out on the deck, drinking a beer and brainstorming or daydreaming about this concept that I called the house, which was like, what if you could like have this house, okay? And maybe you like wire up the house with cameras and mics in a whole bunch of different spots. But, it's got like a kitchen. It's got like, a living room where there's like places where you can play games. It's got like extra bedrooms. So like maybe Miyamoto's in town and he can crash at the house and you like come downstairs and you have coffee in the morning, and while you're having coffee, there's a controller there and you can pick up and play a game, and then the camera starts recording, and then you record the casual conversation that you're having over breakfast, blah, blah, blah. It was this like stupid large concept of like what the idealized like video game coverage was in my mind.
Right.
And we obviously then started working at GameSpy, and we did a thing called it was a very short run show, but that was the real precursor to all of this, called GameSpy Sessions. If you scour the internet, you might be able to still find some of that stuff out there.
Interesting.
You might be able to find me as a very young man with very, very colored, spiky Heihachi hair.
Ooh.
Oh yeah, your Heihachi era.
My Heihachi era.
So these original GameSpy Sessions episodes were the precursor, and it was basically people sitting on a couch talking casually about games with the proper game footage cut over top of it.
Right.
Then GameSpy got bought by IGN. So for a little while, I slid into just doing like normal IGN video reviews, that sort of thing. And I'll be honest, I was a little unhappy there because I felt creatively stifled. I had like ideas that I wanted to do. And
they're not funding the house, which is outrageous.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, no house. They wouldn't give me a house.
Come on, IGN.
But they did move us all to San Francisco, so that was nice.
Yes, God bless them.
All right, that's something.
We were in Orange County at the time.
We were in Orange County. Yeah,
gotcha.
But at the same time, I had met a friend of mine named Jenny Sue at GDC introduced me to Jane Pinkard, who I was a fan of because she was doing a blog called Game Girl Advance that I thought was like revolutionary. And also she was in a band called Dealership that I thought was really awesome. And I met her and we kind of just clicked and started talking and having big ideas. And our big idea was that we were going to take Game Girl Advance and make it into an actual like a big destination, add video, like start doing the things that I was thinking of, but like Jane and I were working on together, coming up with new concepts. And right when we were thinking about, she was working at GamePro at the time, and right when we were thinking about both quitting our jobs and trying to do this crazy thing full time, she got a call from Che Chow over at 1UP who was like, hey, come be our news editor. And she was like, I can't not take the interview. So she went to the interview, and it was with Che and John Davison and probably Sam Kennedy. And she goes to the interview, and I'm like sad that day. She comes back, and I was like, how was it? And she's like, it was really great. They're really cool. I think everyone over there is really cool, and they definitely want to hire me. But I told them that I didn't want to work there unless I could work with you. And I was like, what? And she's like, yeah, I told them like, hey, I have this friend. He and I are like really excited to work together. And they were like, who's this guy? What does he do? And she's like, oh, he does video over at IGN. And they were like, well, we need video. And I realized that, so I got an interview like the next day, and everything I had done at GameSpy and IGN was all the material I needed to like basically build a portfolio to show them, look, I can do this thing. Like I know how to do it.
Yeah.
And, we both got hired on the same day, and like 3 days later we started working there. Jason was there already as an intern, and that was the beginning of our little video team. And
I was there like little video monkey uploading like trailers, that sort of thing. I do remember like Sam like showing me some of your stuff, and he was like, hey, there's this guy Ryan, he's gonna like join you. And I remember him showing me like, I'm trying to remember some of your videos, like it was like one of the ones I think you were like acting in. And I remember when we did like a Netflix like commercial during co-op, I think like you took the idea of like, because it was like here's Ryan, and like you had like your voiceover. And then remember we did it with basically Jay as that part in the video. I remember
this is another
that video, and I was like, this is pretty funny. Like,
this is another throwback. I forgot about this. So God, when would this have been? This was before I got the job at GameSpy. When I just finished school, I had a friend that I had met working at GameStop in San Diego, near where I was going to school, who was this guy who liked games. He'd worked as a tester, but mostly we liked playing fighting games together. He was just a fun guy. And we got the idea to do a review of Devil May Cry 2, which we thought was very, very bad. We made a video review of it, but it also had this like, hey Billy, why so glum? Like black and white aesthetic, like voiceover thing that went along with it. And that gentleman has gone on to work at, he was working at Konami on like the Silent Hill series for a long time. I actually don't know what he's up to now, but he's gone on to be in game development also. So like, it's funny how, I just had a lot of luck meeting people who like were very passionate about games, really kind of knew what they wanted to do. And they were just killers, like just all around, always. And that was amazing.
Yeah, just for like that scene in the game industry back in that era. Ryan, I think it was you that had a tweet years and years ago that always stood out to me, where you said, my life is basically almost famous, except replace Stillwater with game developers. And I'm wondering if that still rings true to you. Did you feel like, I'm getting too close to these game developers? I'm having a tough time criticizing their games at this point. Or is it other aspects of Almost Famous that you're kind of going for?
I don't remember saying that tweet, but I also can believe that I did say it.
I think it was
thankfully don't remember much of everything anymore, which is wonderful. I wonder what I meant by that. I mean, I guess, like if you look back at those early days of the 1UP show, I don't know, there's an episode from the Xbox 360 launch period where Kimi Matsuzaki and Che, actually Kimi's got that was her maiden name. I don't know what her current last name is. I'm sorry, Kimi. But also Che Chow were interviewing Peter Moore, and it was an extremely casual interview, like something that I feel like maybe you would never see now, but maybe not. Maybe still like Phil Spencer's pretty open. Maybe you would still see something like this. I don't know. But it just, I don't know. It felt like everyone was mostly pretty open and hadn't ever been asked to talk in a sort of casual way before.
Right.
Everything was so prescriptive. And I don't know how we got by PR coming and stopping this stuff. And maybe in some cases they did, but certain people had enough power, they were able to get by. So it really just felt like we were all sort of like influencing each other and maybe that sounds egotistical, but I don't know, like the way that amongst in the show, and especially if you include the podcast that One Up did, or Ziff Davis did eventually as well.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like a lot of the conversations that we were having internally, that feedback loop was happening and going back into games, and then we were talking about it again. And I think that's a healthy cycle, and I don't think that's stopped existing. We always just felt like it was in the era prior to ours, you had a very prescribed set of people who got to make their opinions heard about games. It was the people that worked at the magazines or the websites, and that was it. Yeah. And I had been working at, like I said, working at GameStop and Electronics Boutique for years. And my favorite thing about working there was when a person would come up and be like, "Hey, what's new? What should I play? What should I buy?" And having that conversation with the other person about like what's cool about a game, what's not, having them come back with the things that they like, and just having this like really fun and casual conversation. And so to me, it always felt like, no, why does this one person get to be the arbiter, the god of who gets to talk about gaming? Like, yep. I want to hear what everyone thinks. And so we tried to bring that into the show it wasn't just the editors writing on the magazines talking about stuff. It was like, oh, this person who does like art for the website has just as valid an opinion on this game and is a big fan of this game, maybe plays it even more than the person who reviewed it because they only got to play it for a week. Like their opinion is just as valid. So let's bring them onto the show. Let's let them talk. And I think that was something that no one else was doing at the time. And now it's very common. So I do think we were a little bit early on that.
Yeah, I think so. And then the entire co-op era. Cesar, how do you look back on that period in your life?
I mean, it was rough because we had just come off of the layoff and we were kind of still had that steam going. As Ryan said, we still had some gas in the tank, so we were definitely looking to put our mark on the world while still feeding ourselves. But it was simultaneously really fun, and we learned a lot. But like, I there's a story that we constantly tell each other about, like the early era. We were a little too early for like the Patreon, the right. YouTube subscription model, that kind of thing. So we were kind of trying to figure out how to make a show work while still being independent. So we kind of partnered up with a couple companies, and we were doing ad sales. And I will never forget, like the first ad check we got was like something like after like 2 months or maybe it was just a month of shows being out. But I certainly remember there were many all-nighters that went in. Once again, we were playing all the games. We were doing the scheduling, grabbing hosts from different outlets and having them all talk. And I remember the first ad check that came through was something like $50.
It was $400.
Oh, or $400. Well, anyway, we did the math by divided by the hours that we had worked, and we're like, guys, we're making something like 25 cents an hour. This is so goddamn ridiculous. It was just such an eye-opening and like big letdown, because this is 2 months of work, and we had we get our computers together, we incorporated, we did our whole thing to make our company real, and then we get our first check, and we're just like, wah wah wah.
And you guys sold
there were six of us at the time also that we were trying to keep alive. Rob Bowen and Jay Frechette were both part of Area 5 at the time, and so there was just that was a very frightening moment. Like, what have we done to ourselves? Like, are we going to be able to survive this thing?
But it was really indicative of at that time. It was kind of this balance of like, we have freedom, we're 6 people, we're doing what we want, this is fucking awesome, we have the connection still, so we're like really making the content we want, but then trying to keep ourselves alive and kind of trying to market ourselves, trying to grow a business. Like, it was this hard balance that we were trying to strike, and so it was really fun but really tough.
we got pretty lucky, I think, with like some people like Steve Harris, EGM. Like, he got us all our first like computers when we first started, and like there was like an EA.
Mm-hmm. There was so the business stuff from co-op. It was weird. Like, hindsight being 2020, I know what we should have done versus what we did, and what we should have done is we should have just gone hard into ad sales, but of course none of us wanted to do that at all. But we got somebody like right away. They were like, hey, you guys have this sort of brand identity already. we will pay you 40 grand to, you know, do some ads on your show. And we're like, awesome. But it was like, how do we get more ads like this? And so we made a deal with this company at the time called Revision 3, which was like an internet television company.
Yeah.
And the deal, like at the time, you know, like I thought it sounded good when we were in the meeting, you know, but like I didn't know shit about shit. I didn't know how to read contracts. I didn't know how to, like, you know, tell when people were blowing smoke, and they were blowing a lot of smoke. It was a really bad deal. And they were basically like, awesome, we get these guys and we get their cachet basically for free. And they were like, well, and after we got that first check, they were like, well, it takes time to build an audience. And I'm like, you told me that, you know, like we were going to see numbers like X, Y, and Z, and, you know, you're giving me $400. I don't think so, man. Like, this deal is done. I don't care what the contract says.
Wow.
And magically they came up with like a check for $4,000, you know, but still that wasn't even enough for one person to live. But somehow we kept it going anyway. But anyway, it was a weird situation where what we should have done is remained totally independent and gone after like our own sort of ad sales thing. Even though none of us really knew how to do it, the fact that somebody had reached out to us and been like, hey, we will pay you to advertise on your show, and then we could have done it. But at the time, YouTube also had this weird thing with like outside ad sales. It's very common now for people to put sponsorships in their show. Yeah. But at the time, YouTube was like, hey, if you have your own sponsorship in your show, then you cannot monetize your show on YouTube. It was like a policy. It was either your own ads or their ads, and there was like no in between. And they would like, because I was talking with the YouTube person at the time, because back then you could email Joe YouTube and he would email you back, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, we would be interested in having your show on our platform, but you know, if you put ads on your show, we get X percentage of that ad, because like we don't have a platform for this, so you have to give us this much money. I was like, well, that's bullshit. You know, like, what if we're going to give money to somebody? Why don't we make a deal with this other company who was already offering us, you know, like a distribution or whatever? Well, it turns out like we should have gone the YouTube route. We should have sold our own ads or whatever. But you know, that's the kind of mistake that you make when you know nothing about business and you're just trying to make it happen.
We'll make so many more mistakes over the next
so many years.
And so that's basically what happened to Co-op, is just it was not financially viable, so you had to lean more and more on outside video production, picking up documentary work in the games industry.
Before that, though, we tried to bring it live. That was like one of the things that Revision 3 were like, well, let's compromise before. I think there was a certain number of episodes we had to complete, and then it was like, all right, we're going to do this many like live shows. And I don't know.
It was 4, I think.
We did 4.
I don't know. It wasn't the same, just because like our show was so heavily edited before.
Yeah.
I don't know. We tried to build the set and everything.
They were fun.
The live ones.
Yeah.
It was like, in the grand scheme of things, we tried to figure out how can we bring that matching the gameplay footage to the people talking about it feel to a live experience. So we we would not have the conversations ahead of time, but we had notes, like bullet points, where we knew the conversation was going to go in a very specific way, and that we had this piece of gameplay footage to be the thing to be the example of whatever point we were going to make. So those things were all queued up and were ready to drop in at the time, you know, the conversation turned in that direction. And then beyond that, if you've ever done a live show before, you know, there's an adrenaline rush and excitement to like live television that's just not in non-live television. And so that feeling of well, we recorded it, basically, instead of having all of the work be after you record, all the work is before. So as soon as the show is done, we're like, that's it. We're done. We're good. All right, cool. Let's go have a beer. Like, this is great.
Well, then we also had like the interactive thing too, where we'd take like questions from like the community that was like watching it.
Oh yeah, that was cool.
And then having like the live musical guests that we sometimes have at the end. Like, there was definitely some cool, like, I think, aspects to doing it live.
But still, there was no financial model to make it work at Revision 3. Revision 3's financial model was flawed from the very beginning, and the only reason they were alive as long as they were is because they had a couple series of funding back in, like when money was really available for like whatever your wild internet fantasy idea was. And there were people like Kevin Rose who were like just angel investors in their own project anyway, and but there was no good model for supporting it. And before we got on there, Revision 3 had spent all of their money basically paying for a bunch of shows, and then they didn't have the ad sales after they bought all these shows and paid for these shows to keep those shows running. And we came in at the tail end of everything after they'd already spent all their money. So it was a bad deal for us, but Revision 3 was already starting to go down before we even got there.
Yeah.
And I will say, I like
Discovery, I think, after that too.
They got bought by Discovery, yeah.
In the end, though, like, it's like I said, it's easy to remember the good stuff and forget the bad stuff. Like, my memories of that time are that it was rough, but that the people there, like, the people who we were talking to were generally, like, cool people we met.
Yeah,
like,
we really liked working with a
folks
bunch of
over
people there. Yeah, totally.
And like the Totally Rad Show guys, we met them during that period, and they're like really really delightful folks. And I will say we were very. I'll speak for myself. That was the poorest I've ever been in my entire life, and I feel like that was a. It's like.
It was informative.
One of those character building experiences that really changed my outlook on everything in life. Sorry, there's a helicopter above me here, but it was. I think of that period as being very informative and like taught me to be who I am today. If it hadn't gone down like that, my life would probably be very different. So
So is co-op still intertwined with Discovery, Revision 3 at this point, or technically you all could make a new episode of co-op if you really wanted to?
We own co-op. That was at least that was one bit of foresight we had, is that we own the IP for co-op.
Okay.
So like if co-op was to come back someday, we actually could bring that back. Unlike 1UP, it was funny because 1UP, went defunct. And I don't know if you remember Jeremy Parrish.
Yeah.
Jeremy Parrish actually looked into buying the rights to the name 1UP, and it didn't work out for him. But it's weird how those kind of things can like remain in IP limbo. But at least co-op is ours.
Yeah. We have brought it back. I think there's a couple. If you look,
that's
there's
right.
a couple seasons of 1UP that are like one episode long because we're like, maybe we'll bring it back now, or we'll just do this one-off special. And that was fun, but it also reminded us how much work it is, why we don't, we don't make enough money off it. This is why we don't do it, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
I mean, when we started Area 5, we started it hoping that we would be able to continue what we were doing with the 1UP show in a slightly different way, but also knew before we started, look, we know games and video better than a lot of people, and how to like blend that together in an interesting way. There's got to be value to game developers, publishers to do marketing materials that are done by people like us. Like we could surely bring something to other folks. And so that was a built-in part of the strategy that took a little bit longer to get off the ground, because at the end of the day, like the things that we're worst at are biz dev, marketing, PR, because we're a bunch of creative folks that started a company together. And one of the biggest mistakes we ever made was not trying to find some money to hire a biz dev or marketing or PR person to do the things that we are not good at.
Yeah. And now Outerlands, that was kind of, it feels like that was like the tail end of you all making a lot of public facing stuff. I feel like if I may just, from my perspective, it felt like, oh, there's a lot of fans of you out there. I'm a big fan. And it just felt like at a certain point, you all just kind of went dark. And I think like it was around that Outerlands time where it's like, I backed it on his Kickstarter at the time, right?
Yeah. Kickstarter. Yep.
And then I felt like even as a backer, I would get emails, and I think still now I'm confused about like, what happened with Outerlands? Is there some way to watch those again, or what is going on with that?
So starting Outerlands was a response to one of the many times we almost went out of business.
Yeah.
Basically what would happen is we'd get really low on funds. There wouldn't be a project coming up, and we would have to ask ourselves, like, do we shut this thing down? Yeah. And, the last big project we had pulled off was the first Grounded that we did for Naughty Dog.
Right.
That was a project from the beginning of 2013. It went really well. We were really happy with it, and Naughty Dog was really happy with it. And after the project was done, we hope to do another one, but due to a variety of things, that project never came together. Not never, but didn't come together. Didn't come together in 2013 or 2014. So it was nearing, I want to say like October, November of 2014. We're starting to run out of money again, and we're asking ourselves, should we shut this thing down? And I just had in my gut at the time this idea that we do, like, as you said, we had somewhat of a fan base out there that was hungry for us to make stuff that was our thing. And that we had like these great pieces of equipment, these great cameras that could shoot like amazing quality footage. Cause I'm not even going to get it. Area 5 has had many strange, like non-public facing things that we've tried.
I remember the 3D business. Cameras.
We started working with. We started building. We started shooting in 3D for a while. We started doing 3D. We tried to do 3D real estate videos for a while. Like we did 3D fashion shows. We did.
We did
3D music videos.
We were working with people on their Kickstarters. We worked with I don't know if you've heard of the electronica duo out of Israel, Infected Mushroom. They were launching a Kickstarter for a 3D documentary that was all about their world tours and stuff like that. And there's various reasons why that was sent to die at one point. But like we've been all over the place, like throwing spaghetti at a wall, trying to like make certain pillars of our business viable to see what sticks.
Yeah.
And so Outerlands was one of those things where it was like, okay, let's try to do something that isn't relying on other people, like isn't relying on a big company to give us money that they could then just like cut out the legs of, when we're like 2 months into the project. Let's try to do our thing ourselves for us and for people who want this kind of content.
And the reason we could do it now is because Kickstarter existed. So this was after Double Fine Adventure. I'm trying to think of what, there was at least one other big Kickstarter that had gone off at the time within the game space. And so it was like, okay, well, maybe we can do this. So we are going to finish. We have a goal internally to be done with the post-productions of Outerlands by the end of March. And then the next challenge is figuring out how to distribute it. But Outerlands is actively being worked on, and as long as nothing crazy happens, should come out. I don't know we don't know how this thing's going to release. We're still working on that, but I would guess it'll be out this year or next year.
Yeah.
So to the broader public, so to Kickstarter backers, obviously it'll come out as soon as the episodes are done, and it'll just go straight to backers because backers will get an exclusivity period. It's not going to go out anywhere. But our ultimate goal is to hope that we can get some kind of distribution for this from somebody, and that we can make a better deal than we made with Revision 3 for that distribution.
It's good. It's really good. Like, whatever. Like, it's good. It might not be as like timely and relevant as it would have been if it had released 5 years ago.
Sure.
Yeah.
But there's some of this stuff that I am very excited for people to see.
Jason, how's business overall? Working with developers and publishers and that whole thing.
We're still around. I don't know. They keep trying to shut us down, but somehow like.
Yeah. I mean, isn't that the thing though? Like on some level, I think we always thought like this thing's so like hanging on by such a thread. Area 5, like, how are we staying in business? We've almost gone out of business so many times. And at some point we got used to it. It was like, oh, this is probably another one of those times where it seems like we're going to go out of business, but it'll be fine. We'll figure out a way. Like we weathered so many storms that we just like learned that we can do it.
Yeah.
But we just had our 15th anniversary this year.
Jeez, that's wild.
When you think of it, like at some point I realized, I think it was at our 10th anniversary when I realized like, even if we have to close up shop, if we run out of money and everything is over, it's not a failure because we did it for this long. Like that's a success. Like things end. Like this has been a success. Yeah. I will say that I would there would have been no, like, even if the business did die, we would have found a way, however, to finish Outerlands, because, you know, that to me has been the albatross around our necks. Like, it won't feel like we can actually move on to anything else until that is done. But yeah, like, this is the year of finishing all tasks, and we are going to finish Outerlands this year. And I can't wait till people can see it. I mean, I don't know. Even if 5 people out there watch it, I hope if they dig it, great. That's all we care about at this point. And completing what we said we were going to do. That's the main thing.
Yeah. How long has the making of Last of Us Part 2 been in the works? You mentioned after the first one that you were working on something, making of Uncharted 4, I will guess. And then things shifted. So, I mean, it seems like from the documentary, you all were working on Grounded 2 for a very, very long time. Does it also feel just like a lifetime before you can finally get it out the door here?
It seems like that. But what actually happened is we were working very closely with Naughty Dog to get to work on the Grounded 2 documentary and be the people who were going to be in the office shooting it for the entire development process. But Sony made the choice to go with their internal team who are up in Redwood Shores, and they would go down there periodically and shoot stuff. But they also have always had like a video person there, like at the studio, so they could always have somebody who would just like pop a camera on a microphone and go into a meeting and shoot stuff.
Right.
And so what happened is that footage was being shot throughout the entire development through their internal team and through Sony's team. And then COVID happened, and then there was no plan on what to do with this footage afterwards. And so it was actually Neil who said, well, we need to reach out to the Area 5, because they still talk, and this was really gratifying for us to hear, they still talk internally about like that being so good and an inspiration to them about the stuff that they wanted to do in the future. And they're like, well, we need to reach out to Area 5 and see if they want to just take all this footage and do something with it.
Yeah. And
they did. And so they reached out January of last year. Well, even before that, they reached out in like October of the year before. And, you know, it took a while to get the deal together and the paperwork together and everything. And then at the end of January, we signed the paperwork to work on this documentary. And they were like, okay, here's 53 hours worth of interviews.
Right.
And then Ryan spent literally the next 2 months of his life, 7 days a week, because you always got to have one person absorbing everything that happens.
Yep.
And so
he
watched
like 73 hours of footage, actually.
There we go.
With the B-roll and everything.
Okay.
Yeah. And because you have to watch every second of interview, every second of B-roll, and then he was taking notes. Fortunately, you can auto transcribe things, so we put things into Descript so that we could make kind of a searchable database of keywords and things. And then the editing began. And then we always knew that, like, okay, we're going to have to go back and we're going to have to shoot a bunch of stuff too, because it didn't get through the launch of the game because COVID happened, and then there was no more shooting after that.
Right.
So we had to do a lot of posthumous style shooting and like interviews after the fact and like what's coming up next and that kind of thing. What did you think about this after it happened? And so there was, I think, there were planned out shoots throughout the process to us to go get the more material, get some feedback on an edit, go shoot, get some more material, and incorporate that as well. And that's what took from January until we were finally done with the film in September? August. In August. And then it was 4 months of licensing hell, which... So yeah, that was mostly me working very closely with staff at Naughty Dog and internal to Sony to make sure all of our ducks were in a row legally on every single shot in the film the whole way through, and that was a very lengthy process. And so yeah, I mean, it seems like we were working on it for a long time, and we were, but it was all in the period of about 1 year.
That's such a wild...
that was a 2022 project or 23 project.
Right. Yeah, that's such a wild idea just to get all this footage that Sony filmed internally. And it's like, how did you not get anything about Evan Wells leaving? Or like, why are you focusing so much on this? Like, it's going to be so... Look, it's a treasure and a delight, but it also must be frustrating. Like, why do we have so much footage on this one topic and nothing about this other huge thing that clearly would have been awesome to film or impactful to film?
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, like I will say that, of course, if we had been there and we were shooting, we would have made different choices because we're different people.
Sure.
But the stuff that their teams got was, we were like, holy crap, this is actually really good.
Yeah.
Because we're used to working with internal marketing teams at other companies, which shall not be named, who have sometimes sent us footage and we're like, this is crap. I'll make your video and put it out, and I'll polish this turd so that you're happy with it. But like, nobody's going to be interested in any of this.
Yeah.
And yet the stuff that they were at, and they asked some very, you know, after watching the film, you can probably see they asked some very pointed questions and got some very honest responses. Stuff that we were like, man, like, I don't know if this is going to get past like Sony PR people, but we're going to put it in the film anyway.
We don't know if we would have gotten the answer if we would have asked it. Yeah.
I
Like,
mean,
good on them for, you know, taking advantage of their internal position. Like,
Yep.
they really did some digging and some really introspective work, man, with their interviews. Like, really, really good stuff.
You got to credit the leadership over at Naughty Dog for having they want to do something that's so transparent. Like coming down from on high, it was like, say whatever, like be totally honest. Let's be honest about this thing. And we'll, you know, cause it's going to get edited later. We can always take stuff out, but like, let's capture what's actually happening in the moment. And, yeah, you know, like I remember we had a meeting with them where we were like, so should we be avoiding the topic of crunch in this piece?
Right.
And, they were like, no. Am I wrong? No. I think we should talk about crunch. Okay, cool.
And that's because it comes up in the interviews so often. It's kind of an overwhelming
because
theme.
It's important to because it's true to the process of making that game. And it what's happened to the company afterwards is a response to that. Like, and they want to be honest about where they are right now. And so, you know, they wanted to show that making The Last of Us Part 2 was a difficult process. It took a lot, and it went on longer than they thought it would. And it was hard for people, and they wanted to make that clear.
Yeah. Yep. And a lot of that comes from Neil specifically, of the push for transparency.
I mean, I would say all of the leadership.
Yeah, all the leadership. Yeah.
I mean,
they seem to all be on the same page there.
It must have been nice to have the point of reference too for that Raising Kratos God of War documentary, because that one was also. It's weird to watch a documentary that was, you know, produced by PlayStation, and the conclusion that I have watching that is like, I don't know if that game was worth it. Like, I love God of War 2018, but like when you see the impact and just how brutal it is to make a game that good in that situation, it's like, woof. So that's got to be nice for you all to have that exact thing to reference every time there's any pushback about like, can we say this? Can we really highlight this in the interview? To be like, well, God of War did it. You don't want to be less transparent than Santa Monica, do you? Come on, Naughty Dog.
Right.
I actually didn't watch Raising Kratos until about 3 weeks ago. So
really?
I've now seen it, but I hadn't seen it before we made it. No.
Why was that?
Sometimes it's hard to watch these sorts of things when you're in the middle of making these sorts of things. Yeah. You don't want to feel like you're ripping anyone off, or like some idea you had is like, oh, let's do it the way that they did it. Like it feels more true to be able to just like use your own creativity to make a thing. So like I didn't, while we were making Grounded 2, the Double Fine Psych Odyssey came out. And I specifically didn't watch it, but like there was a time we were filming at Naughty Dog with one of the directors, and he was like, "Did you see Psych Odyssey? It's crazy. It's so good. I just finished it this weekend." And I was like, "No, I can't watch it while I'm doing this thing." He's like, "Oh my God, it's amazing. I feel like I developed Psychonauts 2 now." Like, so I'm playing it because I feel like I have to play it because I just made it. And so I did, I watched that afterwards, and it's incredible. I think that's the high watermark for this sort of thing. And it makes sense because, access is everything. The more access you have, the more footage, the more casual the people are going to be on camera, the better thing you can make. That said, would I want to embark on a project that's a 36 episode documentary series? I don't know. Maybe
7 years.
But that sounds like a lot of work. But it also doesn't sound like their feet are held over the fire. Like, you got to get this out right now either. So they're, which is a blessing and a curse. Like, one of the big learnings on Outerlands is deadlines are so important. They're so important. But we also, like one of the great things about doing Grounded 2 is we've grown so much as filmmakers since the time we did the first one and just in over those years. And we had a lot of like lesser seen things that still went out publicly, but didn't get as much eyes on them.
Sure. That
really like seasoned us and taught us how to do this stuff better. I can shout out some of them now.
Yeah,
like, if you might, I think it might only be on a limited edition, limited run, 10th anniversary release on a Blu-ray, but the developer Camouflage made a game called Republique, and they did a big like limited run release, and for that we made a documentary that's their studio story. The whole story of it is called Making Games is Hard, the story of Camouflage.
Right.
And that movie was just like dipping our toes back into telling the story of a development studio. Prior to that, we worked with Blizzard on with their Hearthstone esports team. We made a thing called The Tour. That's available on YouTube, searchable. You can find it.
That's still, I think, one of the best pieces of games documentary we've ever made. And honestly, it made us so much better at being, documentarians as well. Like my shooting got so much better. My producing got so much better from having to make these like pieces of media for Blizzard under the gun. Like they're really good. I would stand behind them right now.
Is there a place to watch those?
Me too. They're on YouTube.
They are.
Yeah,
okay.
they're on YouTube.
I believe if you go to the official Blizzard YouTube there, and search like The Tour, there's like 4 episodes on there.
Okay.
So the show was originally supposed to be 6 episodes. Something internally happened at Blizzard that stopped the project a little bit early. So unfortunately, like not all the, it's like every episode was based around one of the tour stops, or I guess one of them's 2 tour stops. No, they're all one. Anyway,
I don't remember.
We start developing and setting up characters. And so there were narrative arcs that were planned to get like developed over the course of the full 6-episode arc. And it kind of unfortunately gets truncated early. And I'm pretty sure the 4th episode ends with the next time on that's going to, this is what the next story is. And the next story never happens, which is a bummer. We were really disappointed to not get to make the last 2 episodes, because the last 2 episodes would have taken place in Japan and then China. And it's this weird combination of things where you get the personalities of the various Hearthstone players, which are these very young folks. Pro players, but they're very young. And Hearthstone is a competitive game, but in a slightly, because there's so much randomness and chance in how a Hearthstone match turns out, you can't win them all. And so there's a camaraderie between the players that I feel like is just a little different than it would be through other esports.
Right.
Yeah. And we also followed the commentators. So like anyone who was doing live commentary, they became characters in the thing. And then each stop happens in a different location. So there's this sort of like travel show element to it all, where they like go out and try different foods or go shopping at this place. It has the sort of like casual elements of like the players and the commentators hanging out in these various locations. And as Cesar said, he shot it beautifully. It's just like a beautifully shot show. And we did lots of weird little one-up show co-op-y sort of, they're not skits, but we would like be like, okay, we need some more material here. So you 3 go to this location and, do this. Just talk about this.
Talk about ramen or
whatever. Yeah.
Sure. Just guiding it a little bit.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's a fun show. I'm still really proud of it. And not that many people have seen it, but it was one of those things. I think earlier we were talking about how, the one-up stuff kind of like fed into what developers were talking about, and then that would feed, it was like this loop that happened as in a microcosm in the Hearthstone space, where like the show came out and then instantly everyone who was involved, because it's a kind of small scene overall, it's probably like I don't know, 1,000 people all told, something like that across the planet that are really invested in this thing in terms of actually going out to the events. I'm sure that, the fan base who watches that stuff online was larger, but like the number of people was pretty small. So once that thing dropped, you got like the people at the tournaments feeding back into it. They're like, oh, I saw the last episode and like this person's a character now. Oh my God, like what's happening? So then Cesar would start to get recognized. Anytime he would go out to the thing, they'd be like, hey, put me on camera, man. I want to be on that show.
Yeah, people would jump on. Yeah.
So
with
it had a fun little feedback loop.
Yeah, I bet. Speaking of feedback loop, it's one of the most striking things about the making of Last of Us Part 2, and it's understandable, but certainly watching it, I feel like it's just this overwhelming feeling of like, Naughty Dog, you're the best in the industry, if not some of the best developers in the industry. Like, what do you care about this feedback for? Why are you so hell-bent on reading every comment, on checking out other articles that just drive you up the wall? Did you all have thoughts on that? What is the takeaway when the king is still frustrated by what the peon down the street is saying? It feels so odd, but is that just the state of the art,
Well, I think we can relate it to stuff we've experienced ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Like feedback on the stuff that we've done. It's the only feedback that you get. You get feedback from like other people in your industry or like friends and loved ones and that kind of thing, but that's the world that we live in. It's like if I want to know what people think, I have to see what they're thinking on the internet. And unfortunately, what people are thinking on the internet isn't necessarily what they're going to say to you in person.
Right.
And that's just par for the course. I don't know. I can't tell you how Naughty Dog thinks internally, and I can't tell you like why they would take some feedback and not other feedback over stuff. But I think that what they are very good at is taking feedback in an aggregate and knowing when to like, okay, this is really valuable. We should take this to heart.
Right.
And well, no, this is just garbage. Let's just ignore like this entire line of thinking, and that I think that's part of developing a thick skin when you're a creative person in a creative industry is you have to be able to do that in order to do your work.
I mean, they specifically say that they that it feeds them, like you get so close to these things, you can't, because you're working on them for so long, you can't tell if it's good anymore. Also, like, you'll hear creative people say a lot like, oh, I make the thing that I want to play or that I want to watch. And I think that has to be like, that is the way to work. But you can't like that's like, there's a falseness to that, because when you actually do make it, then it's not for you. Like you're not the, you're not the target audience. You're never going to enjoy it the same way. So like, I've heard many people at Naughty Dog say like, oh yeah, I can't play. I'm like, maybe now with this new remastered release on PlayStation 5, it's been long enough that I can like finally go and actually play this thing again. But I haven't played it since it came out. Like, are you kidding me? I don't want to play it. Like, no. So hearing that other people really enjoyed it is like the thing that lets you know, okay, it was worth it.
Yeah.
Like I just like it. And it doesn't matter, like I hope what people take away when they watch this thing is that games are made by humans who are just human. They're just the same as any of the rest of us. And so they feel and love and hate and care and just as much as anyone else does. Yep.
And if Polygon wrote an article about you at your job and got some things wrong, you would also want to scream suck a dick. I think it's only natural.
Yeah.
Okay. Jason, do you remember going through the footage for the making of, or did you help edit this as well? Or was it mainly Ryan?
Oh,
okay. Yeah. Was there a certain moment in the footage that you saw that made your eyes bulge out and be like, oh my God, I can't believe we got this on tape. This is so good. We got to put it in there.
Oh, many times. And probably even before that, like I'd already gotten a text from Ryan. Is like, oh, did you see this part yet? Like, and I mean, there was a lot of, it's a lot of great material. It's
I think
definitely Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's like 72, 73 hours worth of stuff.
That's a lot. Do they have, is it full recordings of those first story meetings? I mean, you open the documentary with it, but that's one of those things where like, this could just be uncut footage.
The whole thing. Yeah.
I just want to see that full thing. I think that's such a fascinating slice to have, is seeing, like Josh, the writer, like presumably hearing the story for the first time, or at that point, had he already been involved with Neil Druckmann at that point? And then like how
that would have been his first time hearing it.
Is that right?
The people who knew about it ahead of time were, so there's a woman with like long blonde hair. Her name is Ashley Swedowski. She's no longer with Naughty Dog, but she's the lead character concept artist. And so the way that the process would be Neil coming up with the ideas for the story. He eventually brings on Hallie. So they two are developing the story. They kind of have the story in a spot where they think, okay, we got this now. Meanwhile, the whole time, the first person besides Neil to be working on the game was the art director, John Sweeney. So from basically right when Last of Us 1 finishes up, he's like putting together like a concept for the entire look. Neil says like, we think it's going to happen like here, but like they had broad stroke ideas of like what the locations might be and all this sort of stuff. And so he's going to try to figure out what the visual makeup of the thing is. So then you have him working on concept art that shows locations, and you have Ashley and her team developing what the characters are going to be like. And then once the story is like kind of all together, so then the only other people who would have known would have been people that he ran it by. So the directors, or it really would have just been Anthony Newman at the time. Kurt was working on Uncharted: The Lost Legacy at that point. So something like, and probably Evan and the heads of the studio, Christoph at the time, like less than 10 people. And then everyone else just gets like little bits here and there, but doesn't actually hear it all. And then they do this big presentation, and then that starts the real actual pre-production period for the game. So Ashley, who you see on camera making a little face when we're just getting started here, guys, like she actually knew what was happening. Josh probably wouldn't have heard it. But I hate to spoil the movie magic here, but like that grimace that Josh makes could have been from any other moment. Like,
liars,
we're editors.
Of course. You
gotta do it. They didn't have perfectly pointed cameras at every single person at every moment.
It wasn't the house after
reaction.
all. Yeah, we get it.
It's all fake. But it was a long, it was like probably a 2-hour presentation, and then there's like an hour of Q&A afterwards where people get to voice their concerns. And there's this movie had different parts coming together different ways at different times, and there was a time when the story meeting itself would have been a big a bigger part of it, but that intro was one of the first things that came together that was like, okay, this is the tone of the piece, this is what it's like. And in every version of the film, that was the intro.
You can't not use it. I was surprised that it's like, okay, we got the ball rolling before even jumping over to Uncharted 4. That was a surprise overall. And then the big question mark is, was there footage of Bruce Straley involved then for Last of Us Part 2?
None that we had, but there was a point where talking about Bruce leaving was a part of it, but there wasn't enough material to, it's just like, they're big, for example, Amy, I mean, I don't know if we should get into all this, but Amy leaving was there's nothing about that. So it's like, how do you talk about, I mean, the only thing I think there's one piece of interview where someone says like, it's Anthony. And he says like, there's a lot of, I gotta say, like, I got a fire lit under my ass here. This is the first game where Bruce is gone. This is the first game where Amy's gone. Like, we got a bunch of heavy hitters that have left the studio, and you don't want to be the one that fucks it up. Yeah. And so, that's what drives me, is to make sure that we are not the game that misses. And, I think like Anthony, if you watch Grounded 1, he was like working on melee combat for the first game. And like he wanted so much for this game to be, you know, one of the best, if not the best third-person action game, stealth action game ever. And I mean, I guess I'm biased because I work with them, but like I can say safely that I think they delivered. And like I go and try to play other over-the-shoulder third-person games now, and it just doesn't hit. Like I can hop in and play The Last of Us Part 2, and I think the game feel is as good as it gets, and as for that style of game. And I think they actually did it. And I love that they record themselves saying things like, you know, people think of us as story first, gameplay second, and we want to prove to people that we can do both. Like, I don't know, again, biased, but to me, it worked on me. Like, I think that's the best playing game in that genre.
Yeah, I think you're right. And now you understand, I mean, not that you were there, it's not a full Psych Odyssey situation, but you have a better glimpse into like what it takes to make that happen, right? And just the drive and how brutally difficult it is. The big obvious question, editing this doc, did you think about your own history with crunch in the video editing field, video production overall?
There's so much about our history, and not only our history, but just the making of this movie, where like while we're making it, we're like, this is exactly like, this is us. Like
there were almost too many parallels. Yeah. When we were going through the crunch section and we're crunching, trying to finish the crunch section, it's like, damn, this is too real.
I think Ryan did say that like quite a few times. We're like, dude, we're doing what they're doing. We're crunching too.
we were all Naughty Dogs at some point.
It just goes to show that the creative process is similar for a lot of people. Like there's a lot of like, at the beginning, you're casting your net really wide and trying to like do things that are, you know, like they were making a sequel, we were making a sequel. We'd never made a sequel before. And so we were like, we want to do things differently. Like, let's not just do the same thing we did again. Let's cast our net wide. Let's like do things differently. And then you kind of like scale it back and find the thing that is, you know, the right version of new and old. And like the creative part, like just then how it sort of like ramps up and like the finishing it is the hardest part and all that. Like
last 1%.
That's all the creative process. And I think, you know, if anything, doing a project like this reminds you, like, I don't know, we all are kind of swimming in the same soup.
Yeah.
How much of a victory lap did you do when Neil decided to talk about the future of The Last of Us and how we think we have one more story to tell? I mean, was that something that you knew going into that interview? Because that was one where you were actually conducting the interview, right? That was
we shot later. That interview.
Okay. Was that one that was a little bit like, all right, we're going to put this cookie on the platter for the internet, or did it just come up naturally and you all said, my God, we just doubled the views of this documentary with that one line?
I had a few meetings with him ahead of time where we talked about like, I guess what I would say is like, before even knowing what the footage was, I had an idea of like what the narrative arc should be. And then there were meetings where like it was very clear, like, oh, the story you want to tell and the story we want to tell is the same story.
Yep.
But the big thing that was left out, he knew that most of the stuff that makes up the last 30 minutes of this movie, that he was very adamant. That was the stuff that he wanted to get out there most. And so,
which was we're turning the page on crunch section,
and just all the stuff about like leaks and COVID and how that whole thing went down.
Yeah.
You know, that's why they knew they couldn't finish it internally, is because they didn't have any of that stuff recorded. And so he was very clear that he wanted that stuff to be in there.
Sure.
And so, it wasn't like I asked the question out of nowhere.
Right.
I guess I'll put it that way.
Nope, that's very fair. Well, hey, I've kept you here long enough. Hopefully that was enough of a walk down memory lane. This could be a 5-hour interview. We could always come back for a part 2 at some point. There's more story to tell with Area 5. So
always.
Thank you for your decades of work at this point, everybody.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Thank you for watching.
Yeah. In terms
it
of
was a lot of fun getting to talk through it all again. Like I think sometimes internally we forget just like how much stuff we've done. Like I honestly I had forgotten that we'd done the tour until like Ryan brought up. I was like, oh yeah, we did this amazing thing, you know. So yeah, it's weird.
I'm sure
Seek that out. It's
something else too.
Yeah, tons of stuff. Seek out the tour. That's a fun thing. And look forward to Outerlands.
Outerlands coming up. Sweet. All right. Yep. Thanks so much, guys. Really appreciate it. And thank you so much to everybody for watching or listening to this interview. You can always subscribe to MinnMax's YouTube channel if you enjoyed it. There's a ton more interviews like it in the interview playlist. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye.
Peace out.
You've seen the headlines. You know that the media landscape is consolidating. Having truly independent games media is more important than ever. MinnMax can exist independently as a place about games, friends, and getting better, but we need your help. The good news is that it's easy. Just click on that subscribe button or unlock a mountain of benefits by going to patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. Thanks so much, everybody.